Welcome back to Breakfast Central. Now it's time for us to take some of the big stories happening around the Eastern African part of the continent. And we have our man, Darren Bartlett, joining us this morning to look at some of the big stories. Good morning, Darren. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
Very well. Now, Darren, how are you? Oh, that was very rude of me. I just answered and I didn't ask you. Hope you're well as well.
No, I'm fine and alive. Some people have been asking me that your president now got COVID. Are you okay? I said, I'm fine. It's the
All
president.
right, all right. I'm glad you are. And it will be interesting to have a feel of the State of the Nation address and how that has affected you. But we'll come back to that. Or maybe I should get your thoughts on the State of the Nation address and how it's been widely accepted and, maybe what must have stood out for you.
Now, what stood out for me is basically the projection of the government looking at it. The economy growing by about 7% is such a good projection given the economic environment that we have currently, inflation going up. It would be very interesting to see how we achieve that 7% growth. But the world, the IMF projects Uganda to grow by 4%. Uganda projects itself to grow by 7%. What it's attributed to is maybe grow more exports to the neighboring countries and reduce imports. It's one of the things that we want to see how we achieve that and take advantage of what we grow best here. Kenya is already suffering with food, and they are already pointing out issues of substandard maize that they have and substandard eggs that they feel that they could be poisoned. So all this presents an opportunity to Uganda to export some of those foods to them. Since we have surplus, we even don't know what to do with it. Sometimes
that's a good angle. All right. We hope that just as Uganda sees itself, that the growth is being achieved. But let's move the conversation to some other angle. Following the recent statement by the UN on the Secretary General for Peace Operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, regarding the withdrawal of peacekeepers from the DRC, how would you say that you believe maybe the Congolese state can effectively step up its own response to the armed groups in the country while ensuring safety and security of the population? And also, how can the international community support this process?
For the 5 days that Jean-Pierre has been in DRC, he has met some of the leaders of the security forces that are in DRC, and he has been presented to a report, especially by Lieutenant Luboya, telling about the situation in Bunia, where he's been, where we see quite a number of rebel activities, the ADF, the M23, and many more others, more than 100 of them there. And we all know that the UN peace mission in DRC is coming to an end. By the end of the year, there will be a transition to see that the kind of activity or the operations of the UN forces have been handed over to whatever forces that will be there at that time in DRC. We know that the SADC regional bloc is sending in forces. The East African bloc has forces there. Angola has forces in there. And, allegedly, the Wagner group of Putin says there. So it leaves the country with quite a number of forces that are in there, that are foreign forces. For me, it doesn't look any different from the UN mission there, because the UN mission also has different forces, in there. The most important thing is DRC able to take care of its security problems? No. And we can go back and trace in history right from 1996, when they had one of their biggest conflicts, came to 1998, it broke out, it became really worse when Kabila went on and captured power into there. Come to 2003, 2013, when the M23 were very powerful. And here they are, they come back. And the solutions that were provided in 2013, where they kind of got some M23 people, maybe rebels, and incorporated them in the army. And that was one of the solutions that they felt that would work, of getting, involving the other rebel groups, talking to them and giving them amnesty, and also incorporating them in the national army, so that the national army then grows and it becomes, big enough to cover the whole country and keep security in DRC. Unfortunately, it didn't go well. That's why we see the resurgence of M23 coming back, and it's been terrible. And without the East African forces, without the SADC planning to send the forces there, without the UN mission, we've seen Congo very vulnerable, and seeing about 6 million people dying since since the 90s to today, it's going to be very difficult. But I think one of the transitional processes is to see that they equip the National Army, the Rwanda Democratic Forces, with more logistics, more, maybe training, and to, see that they get in position that they can actually defend themselves in case of such rebel activities happen again. Whether the people of DRC are willing to take on the arms and fight for themselves or join the army is one thing. They may not have the experience, but though they know, they have the experience of knowing the geography of the place, that they can actually, hide here and probably attack, or an offensive or defensive when the worst comes to the worst. But it's quite a difficult and complex situation for the DRC people. But I hope that the meeting that President Yoweri Museveni had with the other African leaders just 3 days ago will yield a result in there.
It's just really heartbreaking, seeing that, the whole eastern part of the continent continues with these struggles, with these rebel groups, and there doesn't seem to be anyone with the answers to them, and if you really even ask, what do these rebels want, you may not get a straightforward answer. If you even ask,
sometimes they don't want power.
Where's the funding, for these rebel groups coming from? That might be in a different journey entirely, just trying to answer that question. It's just really, really heartbreaking. But maybe you can chip in a little bit on where their funding might be coming from, as we go on. But I want you to also then, let's move the conversation to Kenya, not to Kenya now, to Rwanda, where, of course, President Paul Kagame has fired several high-ranking military officials, and this is just days after naming a new defense minister and army chief. It's said that he fired as much as 200, military officers. Now, what factors may have contributed to the major shakeup in their military, and what implications do you think that these changes would have in, of course, the country's security and stability, now that we're talking about tensions with the DRC?
Well, Kagame is known for being a very, I wouldn't want to say subtle, but he does his things in a way that it leaves you guessing all the time. And what shedded more light, or maybe some light on the reasons as to why he changed his top brass and fired over 200 officers in the army, is when Ronald Rivanga, who is the spokesperson of the army, came out and said that the majors, this is Major Alois and General Francis, said that they were sacked and that they will leave the army because of what they did, and they will not get any benefits given the whatever they have committed or the crimes they have committed. That alone tells you that that was something that was done that is against probably the army code. And Kagame is very much known for a person who is a very brutal guy when it comes to discipline of his army. And looking at 200 people all put out of their jobs, and also changing the guard in Mozambique, because he has a force that is in Mozambique fighting Islamic insurgencies there, and then changing also the guard that has been at the borders between Congo and Rwanda, says a lot. It's either a problem of intelligence, because previously we've seen DRC fighter jets flying through the airspace of Rwanda, and you don't have proper accountability of how that happened, despite having engagements or tensions with actually the DRC Congo, and say, hey, look, you have your army flying into our airspace. And also we've seen some people killed in the DRC who are purportedly the M23, but in the uniform of the Rwandan Force army. So there's so many questions of how do these people get this kind of equipment? How do they get this, army uniform fatigue to the rebel groups or the people that have been killed in, videos that have been circulating on social media and other platforms. So there's always a question of how do these people get this kind of information? We have been accused for so long, but why have we been accused for supporting the M23? So I'm not saying that they fired them because they support the M23, but there should be a problem in terms of intelligence that he thought he needs to strengthen. And it's very important that they get rid of the top brass that could be failing in doing its duty in protecting the people of Rwanda. and also maybe failing the country in terms of intelligence.
I mean, we can only make suggestions and speculations as to what may have been the reasons, because we don't have any confirmed reason. We've run out of time, Darren, but in 30 seconds, do you think that President Kagame would maybe come and address the people and let them know the reasons for what he did, the reasons why he did what he did?
They later on released a statement saying that this is normal. It's normal to change people, to change the army leadership. It's quite normal. But the army spokesman's statement has stuck in the minds of the media when he said that the two have been sacked because of indiscipline issues. So I think they will leave it at that because they've always been known. It's a statement enough for itself. And I'm certain that Kagame will not come out to add on anything to what has already been said by the army spokesperson.
Okay, well, very interesting. And, now that they're saying it's, regular procedure, this happens every now and then, it also means that, letting go of 200 plus soldiers, doesn't really affect the strength of the Rwandan military, no?
Yeah.
Okay, so now, can you quickly share on the question I was asking earlier about funding? These groups, and you may want to spread the conversation beyond, the eastern part of the continent. In the West, there's also Boko Haram. There's Al-Shabaab in the East. There's different groups, of course, that have sprung up in the, central part of the continent here and there. I can't remember the one in Ethiopia now, but let's talk about, the availability of funding and military hardware that these rebel groups have somehow, some way, just always, had in their possession. I understand that there's a lot of, smuggling, that goes on across the continent that makes it easy for them to get these weapons. But is there any time that we would figure out who is funding these groups? Who is behind, the arming of these groups, in different parts of the continent? And can we be honest with ourselves at any point about these parts?
And the upgraded weaponry, because they're not just using basic weapons.
Let me give you theories, which I believe are actually true. In the DRC, and this is known, it's a fact. It's not even actually just a theory, but it's a fact. Some rebel groups in DRC are not rebels with an intention to take over the government. That's why they prefer calling them armed groups, not rebel groups, because rebels usually have an intention to overthrow the government. Now, they take regions where there are minerals. For example, you would have an armed group that says they're in charge of Lagos. They don't care what happens in Abuja. They're just in charge of Lagos. But what is in Lagos? You find gold, you find diamonds. Now, what they do is that they get people, force them into labor, dig the minerals, and then sell them through, they smuggle them out of the country through countries like Rwanda, Uganda, South Sudan, Zambia, where recently a truck was stopped and where it was masqueraded as, it was a Sino truck and masqueraded as carrying cement, and yet inside it there were drums that were full of minerals. Now, that's how they smuggle out the minerals and send them to China and Europe and other countries. Ask yourself, how do big companies, tech companies that make phones, get the materials that they use phones, yet the biggest chunk of those materials actually are gotten in DRC? Is DRC exporting them in the right way, or is the rebel groups that are actually extracting these minerals and exporting them illegally to such companies? And if you ask me, the people responsible for this, indirectly, is the big tech companies that are responsible for it, making cars, making phones, and so on and so forth. Now, that is for DRC. Now, countries like Somalia, where you have the Al-Shabaab, they get most of their money from pirates. They go on the sea, in the Indian Ocean, hijack ships, and then ask for quite a lot of money. And when they get the money, they fund their activities. They get guns from places like Syria, Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, in the Middle East. But also drug lords have been using most of these armed groups across the African continent.
I do think that, this is a question that we might have to have a proper session, analyzing. You've talked about in the DRC, you've also talked about in, I believe it's Sudan or Somalia. Somalia.
It's a lot of smuggling.
Yeah, there's a lot of smuggling. So there's more to this conversation that I would like to unearth, but we have run out of time for this. We look forward to having you again, as usual. Thank you so much, Darren, for joining us.
You're welcome.
All right.